Hey there, everybody, and welcome to yet another live interactive webinar. Fabulous Wednesday. I hope everybody's had a great start to their day. It's actually kind of moderated temperature-wise here in Middle Tennessee, so I'm grateful for that. Hello to Denise, Lisa, Adriana, Janine, Paula, and Catherine. Welcome to all of you. Although most of you I've seen here before, so welcome back. Have I mentioned before how I really don't like those little crown things? I don't like ranking people, but anyhow, all that crown means is what Google thinks your level of participation on the channel is, as far as chatting. So it has nothing to do with anything else. So just ignore it if you can. Hello, Philip, John, listening, Darlene, Laura, Dawit. Welcome back, Dawit. I think it's been a couple weeks since I've seen you. Hello, Crystal. And Laura, hello if I didn't say hi to you. Today we are really going to be focusing on addiction and family roles and just understanding them more so than treating them, because there's so much that has to happen in order to heal family roles. Hello, Shyman. Welcome back. Hi, Jason. Always good to see you. Hello, Lo. And Crystal. Welcome. Hello, Emo Nerd Girl. Emo Nerd Girl. Good to see you. Please remember, at All CEUs, we do have the full, it's actually more than required, training for becoming certified as an addiction counselor through ICNRC as well as through NADAC. We have all the addiction-specific education that most states require. So if you are looking to become an addiction professional, then you can consider getting your training through All CEUs. Not every state accepts it. There are a couple of states that require that you get it through a university or something, but you can find that out on the website as well. Hello, Jewel. Hello, Jay Holmes, Elizabeth, Mark. Good to see you. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's presentation on family roles in addiction and codependency. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Snipes. Today, we are going to briefly define addiction and codependency and their impact on the family system, explain how each piece's domain is affected by and contributes to the cycle of addiction and codependency, identify common family roles and relational patterns in addicted and codependent family systems, including the drama triangle, and explore strategies to support family healing and break cycles of codependency. Now, this video is going to focus mainly on understanding what these roles are and how they developed or why they developed, and less on how to, quote, fix them, because there's a lot that has to go into healing family roles. The boundaries are on roller skates. The trust is generally not there. The behaviors required for secure attachment probably have been inconsistent at best. So there's a lot that needs to change to heal these relationships. But I think it's important to recognize that family roles that develop, regardless of whether it's in response to mental illness or addiction, codependency, or even a healthy family, all of these roles develop as a way to survive and help the person do the best they can with the tools they have. Addiction and codependency, and I consider codependency basically a person addiction, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I also have other videos that go into the parallels, but addiction and codependency are chronic conditions that develop to shield from pain and or loss. A person can develop an addiction. Maybe they start using recreationally, then they start using a little bit more when they get stressed. Their body starts becoming dependent on that substance. So every time they try to sober up, it's really uncomfortable. So they use again. Other people may start, when they start out using, they're using kind of heavily because they're trying to numb out other types of pain. Addiction is a way to try to numb or escape from pain when you don't have any other tools that are working. Codependency is very similar. People who have codependent characteristics usually have been in environments, whether it was their environment of origin or just this environment, but they're in an environment in which they are terrified of abandonment. They're terrified that they're going to lose that other person. And if it was in their family of origin, they may be replaying that in future relationships, trying to, quote, get it right this time. It may be the only way they know how to interact because they learned that they were lovable or loved and safe-ish based on the role that they adopted in their family system. When we talk about addiction and codependency, we talk about people who are unable to quit or cut down. In addiction, that's pretty self-explanatory. In codependency, you tell somebody, quit enabling them. Cut down on your enabling, set your boundaries, be strong. It doesn't happen. The anxiety that occurs when the person tries to stop their codependent behaviors is overwhelming. The fear of abandonment is overwhelming, and they use again. They use again to try to prevent that person from leaving, from dying, from whatever. Spending more time, money, or energy than intended thinking about, worrying about, engaging in, or recovering from the behavior. So for somebody with an addiction, they're thinking about it, they're craving it, they're trying to figure out how to get it, they're using it, they're spending a lot of time, maybe even money, using it, and then they've got to recover from it, either from the hangover, or if it's gambling, from the money they lost, or sometimes addictions people will use when they probably shouldn't be using, and they can lose their job. So they're trying to recover from that. So there's a lot of recovery. When we talk about codependency, the person with codependent characteristics is often spending a lot of time worrying about the person with the addiction. They may be spending more money bailing them out of jail, or trying to put them through treatment for the third, fourth, or fifth time, even though the person doesn't want to be in treatment. They may be spending a lot of energy trying to keep everything together. One of the key characteristics of codependency is the need to hold on, this white knuckle control, because in prior experiences, if they didn't hold on with white knuckle control, things spiraled all to heck. So it's important for them now. They learned, if I let other people try to control their lives, it ain't going to go well. So I need to try to control it. Failure to fulfill important obligations. Well, that's, again, with addiction, pretty self-explanatory. In codependency, people who are engaged in a relationship with somebody who has an addiction or a mental illness may become so consumed by trying to prevent that person from experiencing harm or from abandoning them that they fail to do other things like attend to their children, or they're calling in sick to work all the time because they've got to take care of the person with the identified addiction. Continue to use or stay in the relationship despite negative consequences. That's, very obvious characteristic of both addiction and codependency. Tolerance. This one's not so much for codependency, but for addiction, the body becomes tolerant to distress. The body becomes tolerant to substances, so you need more to get the same high. Withdrawal. You see this in both of them, potentially. Physical withdrawal from substances, we can see when the person's body is addicted. Then when they're not using, they don't have enough dopamine, they don't have enough norepinephrine, they don't have enough whatever. So they start experiencing withdrawal symptoms. The withdrawal that somebody experiences in codependency tends to be more psychological, not exclusively. Because remember, when somebody is dealing with codependency, they are in a virtually constant state of fight or flight. So their autonomic nervous system and all their hormones and all their neurotransmitters are going to get all dysregulated. So when they stop using, when they stop engaging in that behavior, they may have all these feelings they can't figure out what to do with, or they may just feel completely numb and not know how to do that either. So the withdrawal can be psychological. They're worried. They need to be engaging in this in order to feel safe, but it also can be physical, because remember, all of our feelings are actually caused by neurotransmitters and stuff that goes on under the hood. Key behaviors in addiction and codependency. In addiction, we see someone who's in active addiction using, denying, justifying, or blaming. Now let's stay with these characteristics for a second too and look at it for codependency. With codependency, they may not be using drugs. They may be. I've met a lot of people who have an active substance addiction, and they also have active traits of codependency. So anyhow, going back to this, the person with codependency often engages in denial. They deny that this is that much of a problem. They try to prove to everybody else that this really isn't that much of a problem. They justify the behaviors of the person with the addiction, and they may blame other people. It's your boss's fault. It's your ex-wife's fault. It's, the blue moon's fault that this is going on. It's not your fault, or it's not my fault this is going on. And that creates a lot of chaos in the family if there's nobody actually acknowledging what is really going on and taking responsibility for it. With codependency, the codependent person is basically addicted to the relationship and maybe chaos, because a codependent person is trying to keep the family under control. And if there's no chaos, there's nothing for them to try to hold together. So there's a use of people. They engage in enabling. They keep the person from experiencing the natural consequences of their actions, a lot of times through using denial, justification, and blaming. They control. That is their superpower, if you will. They feel the need to control everything. And if people don't respond when they're trying to control, they develop a lot of resentment. So there's a lot of stress. It's like, you've got to do this or you're going to die. And many of their beliefs are often based on prior experiences and even prior relationships, and may not be accurate in the current context, but we'll get to that. And it's like, as I mentioned, the person with codependency is just filled with resentment. They resent the person with the addiction for doing this to them. They resent the person with the addiction for not following directions. They resent other people for making the person with the addiction use. There's just lots of blaming and stuff going out. And it's important that we help them figure out how to bring some of this control back. Because think about it. If you feel like everything is out of your control, it's being caused by other people, it's being thrust upon you, you just can't control any of it, how stressful is that? So we have something called the drama triangle, and I actually have changed it to call it the trauma triangle, because drama develops as a result of trauma. The trauma triangle, as we'll call it, is a repeated cycle of emotional dysregulation, role confusion, and reactivity. If you've worked with families in which there is a person with an active addiction or an uncontrolled mental illness, you have seen this. You have seen frustration. You have seen anger. You have seen hopelessness. You have 3 different roles in the trauma triangle, and each person at any point in time may embrace one or more of these roles. The victim feels oppressed, helpless, and hopeless, kind of like the exile in internal family systems theory. But thinking about the victim from the person with the addiction's standpoint, they may feel helpless and hopeless to change the situation. Nobody gets me. Nobody understands the pain. The person with codependency, they may feel helpless and hopeless because they can't change the person with the addiction. They can't make other people bend to their will. So at varying times, everybody feels like a victim. The persecutor blames, controls, and criticizes. This is akin to the firefighter in internal family systems theory. But the persecutor is the one that is going to try to hold things together. Again, this may be the person with the addiction. This may be the person with codependency. Either way, it's not my fault, and I'm going to try to fix it, or it's your fault, and if you would be better, then this wouldn't have to happen. So we see a lot of tearing down of what's going on. And then the rescuer, who is akin to the manager in internal family systems. The rescuer enables, fixes, and overfunctions to keep peace or avoid conflict. So the rescuer is walking on eggshells, trying to hold everything together. We see these, and I've been highlighting the person with the addiction and the person with codependency so far, but we see these in the children too. We see these in everybody in the family system. The children may feel helpless and hopeless and victimized. They may get very angry and feel, start blaming and criticizing their parents because, they're trying to get somebody to take responsibility and, step up. And a lot of times they may fall back into rescuer when being a victim doesn't work, when trying to raise the red flag doesn't work and say, hey, somebody's got to do something and y'all are failing miserably. That doesn't work. Then it falls to them. They're like, well, screw it. I guess if it's going to get done, I got to do it. And we see these behaviors start to repeat. Unfortunately, family systems roles often are repeated. And if you step back and take a look at your workplace and compare it with your family systems in your family of origin, a lot of times there is repetition. You interact with certain people like you did with your mother, with your father, with your auntie, with your siblings. We repeat those roles because that's what we know. Somebody at work that's a colleague, I may interact with more like a sibling. Somebody at work that's a supervisor, I'm going to interact with more like they are a parent. Unfortunately, when we come from a dysfunctional family, we interact dysfunctionally. Questions we can ask people to help them try to identify the trauma triangle and their behaviors. When your loved one relapses, how do you respond? And you can change loved one to when your dad relapses or when your spouse relapses, whatever. Or what do you believe about yourself when others need your help? And these are interesting questions to ask to children as well, because a lot of times you'll find that the children have gone through a fair amount of parentification. They've had to become the adult because the adults weren't doing their job. Families function as units with each piece being interdependent. Remember, PEACE stands for physical, interpersonal, emotional, cognitive, and environmental. If you've been in the addiction treatment community for long, you've heard the phrase, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. That is the mantra of the addicted family. But let's think about this for a second. Physically, how are they interdependent? Well, if one person is up all night getting drunk and then getting arrested, and then mom has to go bail them out of jail, and she may have to wake up everybody else. And this doesn't have to be the spouse. It could be a sibling. But everybody's sleep gets disrupted. When there's stress in the house, everybody's autonomic nervous system gets dysregulated. When people feel unsafe, when they're walking on eggshells, physically, we see changes in their hormones. We see changes in their sleep patterns. We see changes in their circadian rhythms. We see increases in inflammation. We see all kinds of crap. And as in families where there is a sense of safety, when people feel safe and that physically they have lower stress, they're able to down-regulate. Interpersonally, well, if there's constant conflict between two people, then the other people are probably going to either get drawn into the conflict or withdraw from it because it's not safe. But either way, if the interpersonal interactions in the family are dysfunctional, they're dysfunctional for everybody most of the time. Emotionally, when people are in an environment where the identified patient or the caregivers are really unhappy, it spreads. It's really hard to be happy and carefree if other people in your house are miserable and angry. It's just really hard to do that. And their misery often trumps your happiness. Many times, remember, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. The person with the addiction controls how everybody feels. If they feel good, everybody feels good. If they're in a crappy mood, everybody better walk on eggshells. Cognitively, in these families, you're told what to think. You're told how to perceive things. It's not safe to diverge from the family line. And environmentally, if that environment is chaotic, if those caregivers or the couple, maybe they don't even have children, the couple is unable to manage their stuff, they may end up having housing instability. They may feel unsafe. They may have a lot of stuff. If we're talking about drugs, you may end up with drugs and drug paraphernalia all around the house, which has its own repercussions for everybody in the house, not just necessarily the person who brought it in. Roles develop in response to dysfunction to maintain homeostasis. As humans, we want stability. We want balance. It may not be healthy homeostasis, but if you know what to expect, at least you can plan. At least you know how to balance what's going on. So in the addicted family, and I use that term very loosely, this is very common in families where there's somebody with codependency and or uncontrolled mental illness like schizophrenia or major depressive disorder. So it's not just the person with the addiction, but that's how we typically refer to it instead of saying identified patient. I digress. The addict or the identified patient is one role. This is the person who has run out of skills and they feel hopeless and helpless to change their situation. The enabler is the person who steps up and protects the entire family, but especially the identified patient, from the consequences of their behaviors. The hero is the one who shines. Why did they learn that? Well, if I'm shining, if I'm the hero, if I, am the A student and the quarterback and whatever, then you're going to look at me. Everybody look at me. Don't look at the family. That's a hot mess. Look at me. And if I'm doing well and everybody's looking at me, then for a moment, for just a brief moment, there's calm. People are focusing on me instead of each other and nitpicking in their own distress. So the hero is saying, hey, everybody look over here. Don't look at all that stress. We don't want to pay attention to that. The scapegoat is pretty much the opposite. This is the one who acts out, but why do they act? And they get blamed for it. It's your fault this is happening. It's your fault your father is using. It's your fault your mother's depressed. The scapegoat develops these behaviors, again, for a reason. They've found when they do this that the family quits paying attention to the family drama, to the addiction or codependency or mental health drama, and they're focusing on the scapegoat. The scapegoat gets blamed because the person with codependency not willing to take responsibility for what's going on. The person with the addiction or mental health issue, not willing to take responsibility. We've got to blame somebody else. But the scapegoat also, again, just like the hero, distracts. Many times we will see people with eating disorders as the scapegoat in families where there is active addiction or mental health issues. By having an issue that both parents need to, get on the same page to save the child, they're getting blamed for everything that's going on, but they are also distracting. They're distracting from the drama. The lost child kind of blends into the background. They're just like, I don't want any part of this. I tried fussing, didn't work. I tried helping, didn't work. I don't know what to do. I don't have the skills. I don't have the energy. I don't have the support. I'm going to hide. I'm going to hide because that's what's safe. And if I'm not out there, if I'm hiding, then I can't be the scapegoat. I can't get in trouble. And the mascot. When all else fails, the mascot comes out, and the mascot breaks the tension and makes everybody laugh. The mascot is the one that when things start to get a little tight, they will make people laugh. They'll do something silly. They will try to intentionally turn the attention to them. Not so much because they want to be the center of attention, but because they don't want people focusing on that. And they don't want their family focusing on that. When all y'all focus on each other, it's chaos, and we don't need that. So just focus on me, and I'll make you laugh. Addiction disrupts a lot of stuff. A, B, C, D. Attachment. Addiction, uncontrolled mental illness, and codependency all disrupt attachment in different ways, depending on the person. Some people are enmeshed. They are all up in everybody else's business. A lot of times, this is the person with codependency or generalized anxiety. They're hovering. Attentive. Well, that's healthy. But we don't often see that, or it's inconsistent, which is one of the reasons that it disrupts attachment. Attachment has got to be consistent. That's the first word in the mnemonic for attachment: consistency, attention, responsiveness, encouragement, and safety. Cares. But in addicted or families that are unhealthy, attentiveness is often absent or inconsistent. So each person can't count on anybody being there for them and can't predict how anybody's going to react. On Monday, you may think it's not a big deal. On Thursday, it may be like the world is ending because the same thing happened. So there's no consistency. In recovery, we need to help people start building consistency in their self-awareness, consistency in their awareness of others, not hovering, not helicoptering, but being empathetic, being in tune, at least to some degree, of how people around them are feeling and what's going on. They don't have to fix it, but it's good to be aware. So consistent awareness and consistent responsiveness, helping people stop before they act. They become aware of something. They become aware of distress or a problem, stopping and thinking before they just react with a knee-jerk reaction. What do I need to do to best handle this situation? A stands for attention, and that's the proactive attention that you spend with people, not because there's a problem, but because you enjoy spending time with them. And in dysfunctional families, there's very little proactive attention. Generally, the only attention you get is if you're being the hero, the mascot, or the scapegoat. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who are disengaged. They're not responsive when the child needs something or when each other needs something. It's not just about children. They are not responsive to each other's needs at all. So one person could be floundering and really needs support, and the other person's just oblivious, which doesn't create a sense of safety. They're not encouraging. Well, you've got to be engaged to be encouraging. And if you're not engaged, if you're not attentive, then and you're not responsive, there's going to be a problem. And then finally, safety. Can you imagine living in an environment where somebody's either invading your boundaries a lot of the time or they're disengaged completely? You can't really count on either one of those situations to help people feel safe. In terms of boundaries, we need to help people recognize all of their boundaries: physical, interpersonal, emotional, cognitive, and environmental. I mentioned earlier, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. When we talk about boundaries, we have physical boundaries, and that's how close you come, whether we're huggy or not huggy, whatever. Your physical boundaries. Interpersonal boundaries is who you can be friends with, and how fast your relationships go. And a lot of times in these dysfunctional families, if it's enmeshed, you're not allowed to have boundaries with that other person, and it feels suffocating. If it's disengaged, the other person is not letting you in. They're not acknowledging you. So you're feeling abandoned. Emotional and cognitive boundaries. What you feel and how you think are what you feel and how you think. It's not anybody's right to tell you what to feel or think, and it's not your right to tell anybody else what to feel or think. It is what it is. And then environmental boundaries are your stuff. People going in and borrowing your clothes or stealing the money from your piggy bank so they can go buy alcohol or whatever it is. Those are environmental boundaries. And a lot of times those will be invaded. We need to explore boundaries. We need to help people with unhealthy boundaries, learn what healthy ones look like, and develop a sense of internal safety that if I respect somebody else's boundaries, it doesn't mean they're going to abandon me. If I don't think the way this person does, if I don't agree with them, or if I don't feel the way this person does, that's okay. I'm allowed to have my own thoughts and feelings, and it's safe to do that. That's not how it feels in a dysfunctional family. And communication is often passive or non-existent. We'll just let things go. We're going to sweep it under the rug, la, 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 la. Not going to talk about it. In a healthy system, it's assertive and supportive. But again, in a dysfunctional system, that rarely happens. Or it can be aggressive and critical. So going back to that trauma triangle, you've got the persecutor and the rescuer. The aggressive and critical person is going to be more like the persecutor. This is your fault. You need to fix it. Why did you do this? Why are you doing this to me? It creates an environment where a lot of times people don't feel safe trying to communicate with the other person because they're either going to be ignored or attacked. We need to help people learn, again, and part of this goes with boundaries and feeling safe in your own skin, that it's okay to trust. It's okay to feel. It's okay to have your own thoughts. But that's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's something that families need to start working on very early in the recovery process. And then finally, D is for development. Addiction disrupts development. Addicted family roles, dysfunctional families disrupt development. When children are constantly walking on eggshells, when they are embracing these dysfunctional family roles, when they're constantly somewhere in that trauma triangle, their stress is going constantly. They're developing systemic inflammation. They're killing off brain cells. They're shrinking their brain. They are disrupting their circadian rhythms. They're impairing their ability to learn. They're impairing their ability to function. And when I say learn, I don't just mean school learning. I mean learn about the world, learn how to interact with others, have the energy to even try to interact with others. Development gets thwarted when stress is high enough. It's important to remember as we go through the recovery process that family stress can trigger relapse, whether it's relapse into depression, anxiety, codependency, overt addiction, whatever the dysfunction is. Family stress can trigger relapse. So you may be bebopping along and things are going well, then all of a sudden grandma gets diagnosed with cancer, and that's a big deal in this family. So, oh my gosh, the family's stressed. There's distress. What are they going to do? The person with the addiction is going to try to numb it. The person, if they have anxiety or mood disorders, they're going to intensify that issue. The person who's the enabler is going to try to start fixing it. You see how we start going here. And relapse, once they start embracing those addicted or dysfunctional family roles again, it destabilizes the family. They have started to move the needle, if you will, over here to a healthy family system, but now all of a sudden they're being pulled back. And I wish I would have remembered to get a rubber band, but I worked with somebody one time who used a rubber band to explain homeostasis. And if you stretch a rubber band out, it's a circle, and we want to keep the rubber band a circle. But if one person starts moving away from the circle, they start changing their behaviors, then the circle is no longer a circle. So the circle, everybody else in the circle has a choice. They can either bring the person who's trying to heal back in, or they can heal with them and join them over in this healthier circle. Relapse is not just something the person with the addiction does. And I want us all to really get that into our heads. Relapse is a return to a prior state of functioning. We relapse in depression. We relapse in anxiety. We relapse in addiction. We relapse in anger and irritability. Relapse can happen in any piece of life. Cognitively, I can relapse into more negative thinking. Physically, if I've got an autoimmune disease, maybe I'm going good, I'm in remission, and then I relapse and I have a flare. We can relapse in any piece of life, and anything can relapse, because all that means is we're returning to a prior state of functioning, one that did the job better for some reason. When we see people and families relapsing, we see a return to prior feelings. We see a return to prior attitudes. We see people starting to re-embrace prior roles. Why? Because that's what worked. That's what stopped the pain. So returning to that is more rewarding than trying to keep doing this over here, which is, theoretically going to be healthier in the long run, but it's not stopping the pain. So they may regress to those old feelings, attitudes, roles, expectations, and somatic symptoms. Sometimes relapse comes out in the body first. We start seeing sleep problems, GI disturbances, increased illnesses, whatever. And we need to look and say, what's going on here that is triggering this return? Why? Because generally, when somatic symptoms flare, there's underlying stress. So that indicates that something is relapsed somewhere or is not being effectively dealt with which means before long, if we don't address it, we definitely are going to see more areas relapsing, and we're going to see people moving more quickly back to that old homeostasis that while it was dysfunctional, it was predictable. In terms of physical health, when there's a dysfunctional family, we see HPA axis or stress response hyperactivation. People don't feel safe. That leads to neurotoxicity. When you're constantly stressed, you develop systemic inflammation, which is toxic to your brain cells. And you start to see a actual shrinking in the brain. Sleep disturbances, somatic complaints, exhaustion from chronic stress. Even if you're theoretically sleeping well, being stressed is exhausting because you're going about your day and using whatever energy it takes to go about your day, also carrying along with you a 50-pound rucksack when you are chronically stressed. That chronic stress is represented by the rucksack. We may see use of substances or addictive behaviors to numb. Even in the person that was not the identified addict or what have you, you may start seeing, even in the enabler, in the mascot, in the scapegoat, the use of substances to numb the pain. We start to see increased apnea. There's a strong correlation between adverse childhood experiences and or CPTSD and the development of sleep apnea. Has nothing, irrespective of the person's weight, apnea is much more prominent in people who have chronic stress. We see worsened blood pressure, worsened insulin resistance and diabetes, and hormone imbalances, including thyroid hormones. In terms of relationships, the relationships become transactional and reactive. Instead of being nurturing and, hey, I just want to spend time with you because you're awesome, it's what can you do for me? They become inconsistent, inattentive, unresponsive, not encouraging, and unsafe. For a secure attachment, we need consistency, attentiveness, responsiveness, encouragement, and safety. So we see in these dysfunctional relationships that key aspects of secure attachment are missing, and the person is not going to feel safe. Insecure attachment and fears of abandonment develop and carry into other relationships, manifesting as addiction, codependency, or mental illness. Thinking about people that you've worked with or people that you know who have insecure attachment. In terms of mental health, do they have more symptoms of depression, anxiety, social anxiety, abandonment anxiety? Do they have more issues with impatience and, a very short fuse or a very strong temper? All of those can develop in response to feeling unsafe. The person feels threatened, so they are responding in the way that they learned helped keep them safe. Emotionally, in the entire system, we start to see anger develop at one another. Sometimes at themselves. Sometimes people feel guilty. They think it's their fault, especially if they're the scapegoat and they're being told it's your fault. But we start to see a lot of anger at each other as well as themselves. We see a lot of anxiety. You don't know whether you're going to get Jekyll or Hyde on any given day. You don't know if the identified patient is going to still be there on any given day, whether they're going to overdose, whether they're going to commit suicide, whether they're going to just walk out and never come back. You don't know. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a sense of hopelessness and helplessness because you're stressed all the time and you can't figure out how to make it stop. You can't figure out how to feel safe enough to get good sleep so you can have any energy. And again, all of the hormones and neurotransmitters are just getting progressively out of whack. There can be guilt, as I mentioned, at feeling like it's your fault that this is how it is. And shame or embarrassment. Guilt is anger at yourself for something you did or didn't do. Shame is feeling not okay, feeling embarrassed about who you are or who your family is. And a lot of people that are in dysfunctional families may not, for example, have their friends come over because they're like, oh no, I don't want you to see that. I'm just going to hide that back behind the door. We need to help people recognize the purpose of these feelings. Anger and anxiety and guilt and our fight or flight feelings. They are designed to tell us that there might be a threat and to figure out, is there a threat? And if so, what can I do about it? What is the best use of my energy with the resources I have? An 8-year-old may be angry about the situation, but they can't just move out and say, well, screw it. I'm going to go live by myself because y'all are a hot mess. 8-year-old can't do that. A 28-year-old can if they decide to. But helping them recognize the purpose of feelings and check the feelings against the facts in this context at this time. Unhook from their feelings. I'm feeling angry or I'm feeling ashamed right now. Okay, so this is your shame. You're holding it out here. What are you going to do with it? Describe your shame for me. What's it telling you? What's it coming from? And what do we need to do about it? And help them restructure beliefs about themselves and about what they can control, which goes to that hopelessness and helplessness. Yes, in any situation, there are aspects that nobody can control. I can't make another person change. I can't change the weather. There's a lot of things I cannot control. But in just about every situation, there are aspects that you can control. Helping people focus on what they do have the power to control can give them somewhat of a sense of direction and safety and stability. For people who can't immediately get out of the situation, okay, well, let's focus on what you can control in order to move toward the place where you can get into a healthier environment. Cognitively, because of that stress, remember when we're in fight or flight, we are not able to engage our executive functioning, our prefrontal cortex, where we do all of our problem solving, organizing, learning, memory, attention, concentration. No. We are worried about surviving. So people who are in dysfunctional families often have a lot of executive functioning deficits, which may get misdiagnosed as ADHD or PTSD. So we need to look at it. And I'm not saying it's not PTSD, but we need to look and figure out what exactly is causing these symptoms for this particular individual and what's it related to. How can we help them feel safe and empowered with the tools they have? We see a lot of distorted thinking. People who are in dysfunctional environments are generally surrounded by it. All or nothing thinking. You always do this to me. You never do that. Blah, blah, blah. Very catastrophic, end of the world thinking. There's a lot of personalization, especially if it's a child, because children naturally personalize things. It's my fault that mommy's depressed. It's my fault that daddy relapsed or that so-and-so left. But we see this in adults as well, especially if they grew up in dysfunctional environments and they personalized as children. They're going to continue to personalize as adults unless they develop different skills. But personalization puts a lot of weight on the person's shoulders for things they cannot control. Jumping to conclusions and mind reading is another big thing. You walk on eggshells and you are hypervigilant in a dysfunctional family because you don't feel safe. If one family member comes in and they have a kind of a grumpy look on their face, you're going to jump to a conclusion that they're angry, maybe even angry about you, and you're going to try to read their mind about what you need to do to keep them from getting angry with you or to keep them from relapsing or to keep them from whatever. So people in dysfunctional family systems are almost always trying to anticipate and head off problems. That's most of their focus. And that causes them to be hypervigilant to nonverbals, to dog whistles, some people call them. And we need to pay attention. Yes, that person had an angry look on their face, but what does that mean for that person in this context at this time? And that was something I had to learn when I started working. When my boss would come out of a meeting, sometimes he would have, a very grumpy look on his face, and he'd see me and I'd see him. I'd see that grumpy look and I'd think, oh my God, what did I do? What did I do? Because that was what I was taught in my family of origin. It was always, somebody's upset, must be my fault. I had to learn to check that at the door and recognize that a lot of times he was coming out of meetings and he found out that our budget got cut or our CEO was in a mood or something. It had nothing to do with me. And it wasn't my job to read his mind or to make it better. It was my job to say, hey, I'm here. If something needs to be done, let me know what it is. Otherwise, I'm going to give you some space. And emotion-based reasoning is another issue with distorted thinking. If I'm angry, then there must be something to be angry about. If I'm fearful, there must be a threat somewhere. My significant other who is struggling with addiction is late getting home. I'm getting anxious. That must mean, since I'm anxious, that must mean I'm going to jump to conclusions and assume that they relapsed. All of these cognitive distortions can feed in on one another and create an environment where people feel completely powerless. Things happen all or nothing, and it's always my fault, and it's always the worst case scenario. And if I don't know what's going to happen and head it off ahead of time, then the worst thing in the world. Can you imagine living with all of these unhelpful thoughts and thinking patterns going through your mind? Environmentally, the home environment becomes unpredictable, emotionally unsafe, or threatening. There are environmental triggers for people, including a certain time of day, like when the person with the addiction's coming home, or a tone of voice, or a certain smell, like the smell of alcohol or the smell of marijuana. All of these, any of these, can trigger the stress response if they've been associated with stressful times and reactivate roles and automatic responses across multiple settings. So somebody who grew up with somebody in the house who was an angry alcoholic, when they are around somebody else who is drinking, it may activate their old family roles. Even if this person doesn't have an addiction, it may activate those old family roles because I'm seeing these behaviors, I'm smelling the alcohol, I'm jumping to conclusions about what's going to come next. Spiritually, individuals lose a sense of purpose, dignity, and authenticity. They act out of fear of pain and loss rather than following a plan, following good, orderly direction guided by their values. Instead of stopping to think and figuring out what's the best way to use my energy, they are just fighting, fleeing, freezing, or flopping. Healing requires regrounding in the person's purpose, boundaries, and connections. I encourage people, whether I'm working in individual or family or group, I almost always do a vision board for people that helps them define what's important in their rich and meaningful life. And for example, what relationships are important and what those relationships look like, including, how do you set boundaries? What's that going to look like? All families have roles. Dysfunctional family roles develop through reinforcement to survive in a situation. Each role is the best way the person found to exist and sustain the family system. Remember, they wanted to keep that rubber band as a circle. And if they tried to stray from it, they generally got snapped right back in. And they tried to figure out the best way to survive. All members need to examine their beliefs about their roles and their responsibilities. If I believe that it's my responsibility to distract everybody, or if it's my responsibility to take the blame for everybody, then I'm going to keep doing that. So it's important that we re-examine our beliefs about our role and our function in the family. Healing dysfunctional family systems may prompt relapse because it threatens homeostasis. Remember, going back to that circle, if the family starts to heal, one of the family members, not necessarily just the person with the addiction or the mental health issue, but one of the family members may relapse and try to bring everybody back because that doesn't feel safe. They don't like that change. That's not homeostatic for them. They want everybody to come back and don't leave me behind. Ensuring the family has adequate supports in place and shares a united vision for health, recovery, rich and meaningful life is important to the recovery process. We want to make sure that we're helping that circle move together as a circle instead of, randomly stretching and snapping back. Are there any questions? This is one video topic that I haven't done in a while, and I really like exploring the family roles, and I like exploring how these issues cut across all diagnoses, not just addiction, all diagnoses, because that really helps put in perspective what we're seeing with adverse childhood experiences. Even if there's not somebody with an addiction in their family, generally, there was someone in the family that had an uncontrolled mental illness, or there was uncontrolled violence. It was dysfunctional. And the child or the family members developed their roles to survive that unhealthy situation the best way they knew how. Well, I'm glad it gave you different perspective, Catherine. You are quite welcome, Sunflower Skies. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Shyman, and I'm so glad to see you back. Can growing up in a toxic family cause CPTSD or borderline? Yes. Yeah. Toxic families create a sense of unsafeness that the person feels completely unable to escape, which is kind of the core of the definition of CPTSD. So recognizing that and recognizing the neurophysiological changes that occur as a result of chronic stress, very much so, we see the development of CPTSD. I personally believe, and the APA would argue with me, so it's fine. But I personally believe that 95% of the cases-ish that we have diagnosed as borderline personality are really CPTSD. But since we can't diagnose CPTSD in the United States, that's the closest thing in the DSM-5-TR. But borderline personality, in my opinion, is very persecuting, very blaming. You're this way, you're broken, instead of examining the behaviors and understanding how they developed as a way to survive trauma. Jovan, we have lives every Wednesday at 12 p.m. EST, 11 a.m. CST. Gina, I have an old video on family roles, but it really goes through most of what we went through here today. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.